The teleporter in the Hall of Justice hummed and glowed, and a moment later, Batman stepped out into the main hall. He was surprised to see Superman sitting there, leaning against the table, chin resting on his fist, watching the enormous monitor that took up an entire wall of the room. Superman saw him and gave a nod. "This wasn't your shift," said Batman. "Where's Green Lantern?" Superman indicated the monitor. "Sector 2. Fire at a high-rise in Chicago. He just finished up. Should be back here any minute." Batman looked around. "Aquaman?" "We swapped," said Superman. "I'm taking his watch today. He's taking mine tomorrow night." "You're missing work," said Batman. Superman shrugged. "I took a sick day. I'd just as soon be here than at the planet anyway. At least these crises we can do something about," he said, gesturing at the monitor. Batman sat down across from Superman at the table. "Have you had much trouble in Metropolis?" "You know very well we have," Superman said, turning in his seat to face Batman. He smiled weakly. "But thanks for making conversation." He sighed. "Last night I stopped a mugging, and I was on my way back to my apartment when I heard glass breaking. I checked it out, and someone had spray-painted a swastika and the words "Trump wins" on the side of a deli, then smashed in the front window. When I caught up to them, he was just a kid, not even out of high school, just this scrawny white kid scared to death when he realized it was me. I've caught at least one like that almost every night these past 2 weeks," Batman said. "Last night there was a pair of young men, white, no older than Robin, defacing a mosque on 123rd. "Did you talk to them?" asked Superman. "No." "I talked to the kid I caught last night," said Superman. "I asked him why he had done it. He told me he didn't know." Batman snorted. "That's what they always say." "I think this kid meant it, though," said Superman. "I don't think he has any idea why he smashed that window. I don't think he's ever given much thought to what that swastika stands for." "What did you tell him?" asked Batman. Superman propped his elbows up on the table and rubbed his hands slowly together. "I told him to give it some thought." The corners of his mouth turned up mirthlessly. "What else could I tell him? I told him to think about how what he did would make other people feel. I told him to think of those who have it worse than he does, who are feeling frightened and threatened right now. It was probably a waste of time. What could I do that would have made any difference? I haven't felt so powerless since I don't know when." "Will you be in Washington for the inauguration?" Batman asked. "Not unless I have to be," Superman said. He leveled his gaze at Batman. "Do you think I'll have to be?" Batman made an uncertain wave of his hand. "If things continue on in this way, you will. We all will. This could erupt into anarchy." "And what are we supposed to do?" asked Superman. "Tell the people in the streets protesting this bigoted demagogue to go home? They have a right to protest. They have more than a right. They have a reason. My God, Bruce, I know people at the planet who covered his campaign who feared for their safety during some of those rallies. He'd get his people riled up and they'd turn to the press box and start chanting, 'Lügenpresse, Lügenpresse.' If my father had lived to see this." "Do you remember what I said to you before the election?" Batman asked. "I told you we couldn't allow him to assume the presidency under any circumstances." "Bruce, I'm serious, Clark," said Batman. "We're the only people who have the power to actually do something about this. We can stop this right now if we act quickly and decisively." "And do what?" asked Superman. "Banish the lawfully elected incoming president of the United States to the Phantom Zone? Drop him off on Apocalypse? Mind the fire pits, and best of luck, Mr. President? If anything happens to him, the vice president takes over, and he's just as bad. Maybe worse." Batman shrugged. "Plenty of room in the Phantom Zone. Plenty of fire pits on Apocalypse." Superman blinked. You're serious? Only because the alternative is that much more unthinkable. Superman raised his fist to pound the table, but held himself back at the last moment. He flattened his hand and placed it gently on the tabletop. That's what got us into this mess in the first place, he said calmly. It was unthinkable. It's still unthinkable, even though it's happened. It is happening right now. Ever since election night, I've been thinking about what I said to him that day when we took turns trying to get through to him. I took him 40,000 miles up and showed him the planet the way I see it. I tried to make him understand. And then I said to him that he was never going to be the president. That I didn't think the American people would ever inflict that kind of a wound on each other. And I remember how I felt in that moment. I remember how sure I was of what I was saying. How in control I felt. Part of me wants to go back to find that feeling, and part of me wants to go back so I can meet myself in the past and tell myself what a fool I am. What an arrogant, short-sighted fool. Superman lowered his head. How could I have not seen this coming? Because we weren't paying attention. Superman and Batman turned to see Green Lantern walking into the main hall. How'd things go in Chicago, Hal? Superman asked. Green Lantern walked around to the other end of the table and leaned into a corner of the wall. Fine, he said, folding his arms. Fire's out. No one was seriously hurt. He stared at the floor for a moment, then looked up. Talking about the election? Superman nodded. What did you mean we weren't paying attention? Asked Batman. I mean we weren't paying attention to what we should have been. And if we had, we wouldn't be sitting around in shock over the election 2 weeks after the fact. Green Lantern took a deep breath. A few years ago, I was in Star City when this African-American man in his 60s or 70s, came up to me and told me he heard that I worked for people with blue skin, and I'd been all over the galaxy helping out people with purple skin and orange skin. But what he wanted to know was, what had I ever done for people with black skin right here on Earth? What did you say? Asked Superman. Nothing, said Green Lantern. I had no idea what to say. Green Arrow understands it better than I do, probably better than any of us, and for a while he tried to show me, to open my eyes to all the problems I'd been neglecting while I was out trying to save the universe. But I fell back into the old routine eventually, drifted further and further away from what Arrow and that old man were trying to tell me. And you know what I realize now? It wasn't just me. He pointed to Superman. It was you. He pointed to Batman. It was you. It was Wonder Woman. It was Aquaman. It was Flash. It was all of us. We all missed it because we weren't looking and we weren't listening. Batman stood up from the table and approached the crisis monitor. We can sit around wringing our hands over what we should have done, or we can determine what we're going to do from this point on, he said, his back to the other two men. And what's that? Asked Superman. You do what you like, said Batman. I'm going to dig up every body our new president-elect has ever buried until I find something that I can make stick long enough to take him down. And then what? Asked Green Lantern. Batman turned to face him. What do you mean, and then what? Denying him the presidency is the goal. What about Pence? Asked Green Lantern. We've been over that, said Superman. There's always another supervillain waiting to take over from the last one, Batman said. That's the way it's always been. It's no different now. We take out this one, then we deal with the next one. This isn't a supervillain, said Green Lantern. This is a democratically elected president of the United States. He didn't seize power. He was chosen legally by the voters of this country. He himself might be the most dangerously unqualified and personally detestable person to ever occupy that office, but he's not the problem. He's only a symptom. He's an effect, not a cause. What's the cause? Asked Batman. Apathy, said Superman. So many people who could have voted but didn't. Or maybe cynicism, people mistrusting institutions that have failed them too many times. That's why they voted for what they thought was change, even if that change was reckless and destructive. What about ignorance, Batman said. Credulity. Prejudice. Giving people scapegoats. Placing blame at the feet of certain groups, then promising to make those groups pay. Manipulation through fear and empty promises. Probably a little bit of all of that, said Green Lantern. Probably a lot of all of that. I've been trying to imagine what that old man who came up to me in Star City would say if I asked him what the problem was. I've tried to imagine myself in his shoes to see the world as he might have seen it. And I think that maybe he'd say that part of the problem is what we're doing right now. Watching the crisis monitor, Batman said. Complaining about politics like my father and his retired buddies used to do over coffee every morning at McDonald's, said Superman. No, said Green Lantern. Look at us. What are we? Besides our costumes, besides our powers, besides our jobs, we're 3 white, straight, cisgender men. We're able-bodied. We're more than able-bodied. We're healthy. We don't live in poverty. And what do we do when we want to figure out what went wrong on Election Day? When we want to discover the cause that could possibly have resulted in something like Donald Trump being elected president of the United States? What do? We talk to each other. We come here to the ultimate superhero sanctuary, away from all the lesser ordinary people. And we look to people just like us for answers to questions we didn't even know we were supposed to ask until 2 weeks ago. The worst part, said Superman, is realizing how comfortable I've gotten. I know I have to change, but where do I even start? Before anyone could answer, the crisis alarm sounded. Batman manned the control panel and expanded the video feed for Sector 7, which was the source of the alarm, to full screen. Looks like there's a hostage situation in Kiev, Batman said. Pro-Russian rebels have taken control of a government building. It's a heavily populated area. Things look to be escalating quickly. I'm on it, said Superman. The next moment he was gone in a blur of red and blue. I'll give him a hand, said Green Lantern. His power ring glowed green as he charged out the door. Batman had been alone in the main hall for half an hour or so, watching on the crisis monitor as Superman and Green Lantern worked in tandem to disarm the rebels in Kiev and make sure their hostages made it to safety, when Green Arrow arrived via the teleporter. Holding down the fort all by yourself? Arrow asked, stepping off the platform and heading straight into the kitchen. Superman and Green Lantern were called into action, said Batman. I'm monitoring the situation. "Oh, Hal's on tonight?" Arrow shouted from the kitchen. "Too bad I missed him. I haven't talked to him since... well, you know." Arrow emerged from the kitchen carrying a brown paper bag. "You mean since the election," said Batman. "Yep," said Arrow, or as I like to call it, the day America's chickens came home to roost. "You say that like it's a good thing," said Batman, narrowing his eyes behind his cowl. "Oh, hell no," said Arrow. "It's awful. It's no good at all. But it's what we had coming. We can turn our heads and plug our ears while black folks and women and immigrants and poor folks and everybody else who can't get a fair shake are degraded and spat on. And we can go on making excuses for bigots and rapists to keep on saying and doing as they please. But sooner or later, the cost of all that's going to come due. And it's not just going to fall on the people at the bottom. It's going to fall on all of us." "Anyway," Arrow said, shaking the brown bag, "I got what I came for." He trotted back to the teleporter. "Flash's tuna salad. I had some last week, and I've been thinking about it ever since. I feel a little bad stealing some, but I figured he made enough for everyone, and Aquaman's not going to want his share, right?" He stepped up onto the platform. "Have a good shift." "Oliver," Batman said, taking a few steps toward the teleporter. "Hal was telling us how you understood the problems that led to this election result." "Oh yeah?" said Arrow. "The people who are fearful of Trump, the ones who support him, the angry and the threatened. He said you've come to understand them better than any of us," Batman said. "How did you do it?" Arrow smirked. I lost everything I had, he said. The teleporter glowed bright for an instant. When it dimmed, he was gone, and Batman was alone again. Well, folks, that's my story, and I would say this was not only the third, but most definitely the final installment in this little impromptu trilogy of DC Universe / Donald Trump fanfic stories that I've done since the summer here on the Off Monday Ramble occasionally. I thank some of you for leaving kind comments about them. I've enjoyed writing them. It's been cathartic for me to sort of try to work out some of these issues with the election through the voices of some characters that I grew up reading and watching and having some degree of faith in. It's kind of comforting to be able to write these characters and sort of show them struggling to deal with the same things that I have struggled to deal with and that many of you have struggled to deal with as well, especially since the election. So I thank you for your attention and your kind indulgence. If you enjoyed this video or the other videos I do, please consider supporting this channel by becoming a patron of my channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron. I thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.